Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Living Astrology with Janet. It is time to grab your cup of coffee or your tea, sit back and relax while we chat about, well, many different things today that we are going to talk about, mainly things about the stars. And thank God the Seahawks won it all yesterday. The Super Bowl win was something fantabulous to see. I guess maybe by some standards, the game wasn't like all that exciting, but for us, in Seattle or the Washington Pacific Northwest area, it was a fantastic game. And of course, the other team did a great job, just wasn't good enough to win the Super Bowl. Two great teams, though, watching them play, both sides, fighting for the Lombardi trophy. It's great. And it reminds me of something very interesting that happens here in our society and culture now. In many years gone past, there were always times where the society would come together as a group and they would let off steam collectively. And that happened on a regular basis in the Mayan calendar. It was an every 65-day process where the whole of the society would come together to let off this steam. And in fact, they would have a time where they would douse all the fires, right? This is Mayan time, so everything was fire, right? Not stoves and things like that. They had fires. And they would douse all the fires, everything would go dark, and then the next day everything would be lit again, and the society or culture would come together and they would party. They would party like it's 1999, and they would have a great time. They would let off steam, and then the next day they would go back to their regular lives. And they would do this on such a regularity that it would stop the buildup of some of the anger and angst and so forth that would come up, that comes up in any society, right? In any culture. And then they would have this vent, if you will, a way to let it go. And it's something we do not have in our society anymore. So unfortunately, we see it come out in various weird ways, like shootings or, mass explosions and things like that, where when we have something collective that we're all rooting for, and it doesn't even matter if you're rooting for a different team, right? That part doesn't matter. It's this coming together, the release of a bunch of pent up emotional energy that then allows us to move forward without all of that energy hanging around us. And literally, the Super Bowl is one of the very few ways that our society, we might have other things like soccer games and the Olympics, which are only every 4 years, or 2 years now if you do winter and then summer 2 years later. Those are the things where we can collectively come together, celebrate, release some steam, and then go back to our regular lives. But we don't do it on a regular basis. So when we had a society that was doing that every 65 days, I would bet that there was not as much issue with violence and so forth in those cultures or those societies. Something for us all to think about, right? 65 days from now, what is it that we want to celebrate, right? We do have holidays, but all of our holidays seem to be mostly religious oriented. And if you're not someone who practices that religion, then it's not the collective release that we're looking for. I'm not sure what the exact solution to all of that is, but maybe we could, come together and experience something like Super Bowl-esque every 65 days, right? Doesn't have to be a game, but certainly was a fun game to watch. The commercials were so extraordinary. And I know you guys know that almost 4.5 years ago now, I lost my youngest son to suicide. And one of his favorite songs was by I think it's the Backstreet Boys. One of those groups. And it was I Want It My Way. Anyway, so there was a commercial in the Super Bowl where they were singing that song. And at the very end, they said something about go get a Slurpee. And all of us in the room yesterday just about cried, because not only did my son love that particular song and would sing it at the top of his lungs, but he died on 7/11. And 7-Eleven is a convenience store chain around here that on that date gives everybody free 7-Eleven Slurpees. So it was almost like a sign from Brian above that we were to pay attention to this game. Like he was tapped in, telling us through that commercial. I know that sounds weird, but it was there. It was true. We all looked at one another, and it was just amazing. So it was a good weekend. Spent it on a family day on Saturday and then another family day on Sunday. I hope all of you also were able to spend the weekend doing something that you love, even if it wasn't about football. Today, we have some important things to talk about. There's not a lot going on this week, so it gives me some time to do a couple of extra little things that I want to do. This particular week's or Monday broadcast is about revolution to possibility, and it is about how Venus is moving into the sign of Pisces tomorrow and Saturn later this week moving into Aries, although I don't want to deal with that today so much because it happens on Friday. But I do want to talk about Venus, and I'll let you in on more of that as we get to the end, because Venus wasn't always the milk toast that she is today in our archetypal energies. All right, so let's start off with the Human Design Week today, because we have just moved into the week of revolution. The gate 49 is the gate that the Human Design Sun is sitting at, the gate of revolution, or the catalyst to change. And that change is all about how do we kind of throw over some of the energies of lethargy that we have around different things, and how do we realign ourselves to values, right? To our stated values. And maybe sometimes the gate 49 is about how it is that we release ourselves from the old agreements, right? The contracts that no longer are in alignment with who we are or who we are becoming. So it's a very interesting week. Now, the Earth will be in the gate 4, which is up on the ajna. By the way, the 49 is down on the solar plexus, so it has a lot of emotional energy attached to it. And the gate 4 is on the ajna, so you know it has something to do with the mind, because the ajna is the second center down. It's about the brain and how we think, and the different ways in which that we gain certainty or not. And some of you are very familiar with the fact that I always say in human design, there is not one person designed to make decisions from the ajna, or from the head center for that matter, from thinking. And here we have a week where we have both the emotional energy and the mind energy that is defined. So this Human Design Week really opened up yesterday, and it is about emotional truth telling and the principled changes that we need to make as a society, but also as individuals, as this is also playing out in your individual human design chart. Now, the sun moving through the gate 49 is the center of emotional awareness, or in the center of emotional awareness. And this particular gate brings us into the chemistry of emotional energy and relational truth. This is not mental change, right? This isn't change because we thought, oh, we need to change or do things differently. This is real change, right? Visceral, emotional, deeper down kinds of change. This is not impulsive rebellion. This is emotional recalibration, right? We're recalibrating, because gate 49 catalyzes when something is no longer aligned with our values. And so we have to make changes. And at its core, the gate 49 is really about values, agreements, and intimacy. In human design language, the 49 is part of the channel that connects over to the 19 on the root center. And that channel is sometimes called the channel of love and marriage. Even though it's not specifically the agreement of marriage, it's the emotional intimacy that something like a marriage or a significant relationship in your life brings you to. And yes, there's this literal chemistry here, the chemistry of connection, I guess is how I would put that. Gate 49 kind of, governs whether the emotional energy, the bonds between people can be sustained over time. And when this energy becomes mastered, when it's the highest level of operation, you can consciously cultivate the emotional frequency that it takes to allow intimacy and peace and longevity and the sustainability to thrive within your relationships. So it's really a very mighty gate or combination of energies that we have for this particular week. Now, this gate also has a deep intuitive sensing mechanism called the emotions, right? And it knows when value is worth standing for, when something is worth standing up for, when an agreement will support life or support thriving within the relationship, and when something is quietly expired. It also knows that. When is it time to let it all go? And in its highest expression, the gate 49 holds to principles that support true alignment with one another or true alignment with a value. And it inspires others then to make more expansive values based changes in their own lives, but also in a community or a kind of a collective consciousness level. And it can anchor emotional truth as well, but without the unnecessary drama that sometimes, humans can get into with their emotional energy these days. But it also aligns our personal choices with the collective peace and sustainability that is available when we choose it, right? We can choose it. This is revolutionary energy, to be sure, but it doesn't burn bridges. And it is sort of building a better foundation for all of us to be together within, right? So it also has an unbalanced expression, though, as all the energies do, right? Even Venus in her most loving, kind, generous way can have a very low signature as well. And in its unbalanced expression, this energy can be, because it's emotional and it can be reactive, then it will quit too soon to avoid emotional vulnerability. So we are all working within our ability to stay the course of something in a relationship, and live it through, right? Even through the highs and the lows. It can also be where we stay too long in a relationship or in an agreement of sorts, out of fear of the disruption that would be brought to us if we made that change. And in that case, then what we find is that we're compromising our values to maintain the comfort of that relationship, or the comfort of not having to change. Not necessarily comfort in the relationship, but the comfort of not having to make the change. And then we find ourselves fighting for outdated agreements that no longer serve the higher good. Kind of see that going on in the outer world these days, right? Trying to drag us backwards into old times and old agreements and old ways of thinking. Now, this is where emotional reaction energies masquerade as principles, right? And that brings us directly into the gene keys of this particular gate, the frequency band of energies here in the gate 49, or the gene key 49. The shadow is reaction. And reaction means we're knee jerking, right? We're just jumping out and responding quickly, impulsively, reactively to the emotional input. In the gift level of this gene key, we have revolution. So we see that revolution is much more focused energy. And in the Siddhi, the highest level, it's rebirth. So what we have is a journey from reaction to rebirth through revolution, right? The lesson here is really profound, but it's also kind of subtle in some ways, because here it says to us, don't quit prematurely. Don't leave the relationship. Don't quit the agreement too soon, but also don't stay until it's past its healthy point, right? So we have to balance, when is it healthy to stay versus when is it unhealthy to stay. And don't settle for agreements, whether they're relationship oriented, emotional oriented, or contractual, especially if they're no longer worthy of who you've become, of who the collective has become, right? What have we moved beyond in our maturity? So this is a gate. The gate 49 is a gate of emotional maturity in action, when we consciously are choosing to move beyond what has been. What When we consciously choose to move beyond the old tapes, right? The old patterns. Balancing the gate 49 in revolutionary energy is the gate 4, which is on the ajna leading up to the head center, called the gate of possibility. Now, here's where the grounding comes in, because the earth always is the grounding piece, right? So when we have a sun earth combination, the sun is the highest that we're looking to attain. The earth grounds is what needs to be grounded in first in order to attain that. So the earth here, which stabilizes and then anchors the sun's expression, is in the ajna, the center for thinking and believing and wondering and seeing what more is possible. And this gate can govern, the gate 4 can govern the mental frameworks and the answers and the meaning making, but it has to be in its evolved form, because it asks us to loosen our grip on certainty, what it is that we absolutely believe to be true. And many of us, we have those sacred cows, right? Those beliefs. We have those ideas that we just will not deviate from. And this particular week is asking us to really evaluate whether what we believe is in alignment with our values or is a counter to our values. And in the gene keys, this gate seems very interesting to me, because I think it moves us through some of the most visceral energies of humanity. And in the shadow of this particular gate, it is called intolerance. And in the gift, we have understanding. And in its highest expression, forgiveness, right? So we're moving from the shadow of intolerance to forgiveness through understanding. The yummiest of energies, and certainly necessary here in this world at this moment. So the key here, and the reason why this gate is so essential, if we look at it across the backdrop of the whole of what's happening with humanity right now, is that this gate asks us to treat possibilities or ideas as possibilities, not answers, right? There's no one answer, but there are a jillion possibilities, right? And gate 4 then invites us to curiosity over certainty. Like, what would happen if we decided tomorrow that we're just going to live in peace, that we're not going to fight one another, that we're going to love one another, right? Well, that we're going to use love as the first frame that we look through when we are deciding what happens next. So this particular gate asks us to allow the imagination to open up new pathways, rather than locking into the rigid conditions and conclusions that we typically do, right? We typically get locked in. And when paired with the gate 49 of revolution, then this becomes emotionally regulating, right? It helps regulate our emotions. So the gate 49 says something must change, right? There's this wind that is blowing that's telling us something needs to change. The gate 4, where the earth is sitting, says, let's not decide too quickly what that change must look like, right? Possibility becomes the emotional stabilizer. And so possibility is what we're tapped into in order to see what the next steps would be in a revolution or in the catalyzing of change. And when you allow your ideas to remain open, your emotions can settle down. And when emotions settle, clarity emerges, right? We always say that decisions with the emotional center are made with clarity over time. That means we don't jump, we don't leap, we don't jump to conclusions. And from clarity, forgiveness becomes possible for yourself, for others, and for the past, for the past issues. So this week isn't about the dramatic ultimatums that a revolution can bring up. or any knee-jerk, reactive energies that are stimulated by emotional input. It's really about listening for the emotional truth. What are you really truly feeling in the truth? About questioning our outdated beliefs or our outdated agreements, and then staying open long enough for a wiser answer to appear, not just the pat answer that we always apply to certain situations. And then letting that possibility soften the emotional intensity of what is happening, right? And this is revolution with a heart and clarity without the idea of cruelty, right? We I think, at least here in this country, we've jumped to some horrible conclusions and taken actions to correct those conclusions without ever really testing the veracity of those particular ideas and those particular things, right, that we're thinking or that we believe. And then we're taking actions based on that belief, right? We didn't ask any real questions, and so it allows this cruelty to come in the way that we are treating other people. So this sets the perfect stage this week for us to ask those questions, right? What is it that I'm really feeling? What is it that I'm really responding to or tempting to react to, right? Okay, so let's stop for a minute and say good morning to everybody joining us before I jump into Venus. And I have some really interesting things to say about her this morning. So let's see. Good morning, Amy D. It's good to see you out there. And Slug O Pixie. I love that. Good to see you out there. And Lex the Hex 92. Good morning. Good to see you. And Narges. Good morning to you. Gala Attack. Is that what that says? Gal Attack? Gal Attack. Hello, Galactic family. Good to see you. And Namira, good to have you with us. Teddy, good morning. Yes, the energy has been high until Wednesday. Wednesday is the parade for the Seahawks. I can't even imagine being in downtown Seattle for this one. But it would be fun one time to be able to go. But I got a busy day that day. Christine Buckingham, good morning to you. And Namira sending all of us love. And oh, well, yes, I did, Christine. It started actually on the ferry ride home on Saturday after visiting my son. My oldest son lives in Friday Harbor, which is a ferry ride away from here. And Wyatt, Brian's son, went with us because we try to spend as much time with him, integrating him into this family, even though Brian is gone. And he picks up his phone and he hands it to me with that song playing. And I mean, the tears just started to roll. And he says, "Don't cry, Grandma. It's okay, Grandma." And that started it, right? And then to hear that commercial on Sunday during the Super Bowl was just unheard of, right? That those are signs, definitely signs. Ingrid, good to see you. And yeah, what a great sign, right? That he's there. Brian and Mama Blue were the wings for Jason Myers. Jason Myers should have been the most valuable player, the MVP. I don't know, but Walker was good too. Asa, good morning to you. And Narges says, Brian, watching the game with you and family, it was pretty amazing indeed. And thanks, Asa. And Jana, good morning. Heather Yielding, good morning. I haven't caught you live in a very long time. This gate sounds amazing. It is an amazing time of the year, Heather. And all of this, coming up for us just before the astrological new year, which would dawn on us next month, right? Tom, good morning. Jana says, my natal Saturn is in gate 49. You are a revolutionary with strategy, principles, and a plan. There you go, Jana. And Jackie J-Lo, good morning to you. Terry Strauss, good morning. Love is the way. Oh, the Hawks were in the stars. Oh, definitely. This was written in the stars. And my grandson is a very sweet kid. He is unbelievable. He has the best of his dad, Brian, and his mother, and it's amazing to watch. I was just thinking before the show this morning how extraordinary it is. I spent time this weekend with pretty much most of my grandchildren, right? Three of my grandsons were with us, three of my granddaughters were with us on Saturday. And then, of course, I live here on the property with two of my grandkids. And yeah, it was just it's an amazing weekend. Grandkids are, your gift for raising your children. That's what I always think about them. Okay, let's change gears, shall we? So, tomorrow, Venus, who has been in the sign of Aquarius, a very mind oriented sign when she's a planet of the heart, and tomorrow she begins the move out of Aquarius and into Pisces, where she's moving from more of the disruptive energies of Aquarius, and disruptive not necessarily in a bad way, but there's those energy frequencies that roll. Uranus as the modern ruler of Aquarius means that there's also disruption, right? There's the potential for awakening and for surprises and shocks. And she moves from that disruption to devotion in the sign of Pisces. So Venus is shifting the tone of the energies, and as Mercury did on Friday when he moved into Pisces. So yesterday, Venus was in the square to Uranus. If you remember, we talked about that on Friday. So that aspect acted sort of as a final emotional, perhaps, jolt of energy, especially in relationships and values and finances and self-worth for every one of us, wherever that Aquarian energy happens to land in your personal chart. And now Venus in Aquarius, who has been asking us to detach, to observe, to step back from, and look at our values and look at our self-worth and look at our agreements from a more collective lens, right? Because it was collectively happening. And Uranus in Taurus, meanwhile, has been shaking up the ground beneath us in terms of what we rely on for stability, whether that's money or security or the embodiment, and Uranus, the nervous system. So we've had all of these things going on. And then the square yesterday, which could show up as sudden realizations that happen, within the context of our relationships or values, maybe emotional surprises and disruptions. Certainly hearing a commercial with that song, and then the mentioning of the Slurpee was like shock to the system for us. There could have been restlessness and maybe some breakaway urges or clarity that arrives, and you like place it in your life, and you're like, this is what this means. Maybe a feeling of, I can't keep doing things the same way. I can't keep doing it this way. So the gate 49 energy, birthed yesterday as well, comes along and says something no longer aligns. So what am I going to do to change that? Right now, the tone is going to change from that. Well, we still have the revolutionary energy there, but Venus isn't in the gate 49. She's in the gate 30 as she moves out of Aquarius and into Pisces. So she's in a gate that says, align with your passion, align with what you love, right? Align with value, your value. So as she leaves Aquarius and enters Pisces, she'll join up. She doesn't come into a conjunction, but she'll join the energy of Mercury already in Pisces. And because now we're going to be witnessing this process of shifting from the mind energy to the spirit energy, Pisces ruling the spirit, right? Spiritual energy, our connection to the divine, our higher power. Aquarius is conceptual, and we need that as well. But Pisces is permeable. Pisces dissolves where Aquarius analyzes, right? So as Venus enters Pisces, the questions stop being about, does this make sense? Or is this logical? Or is this progressive, right? We don't have to think that way now. And we don't have to feel our hearts through that lens now. Now it starts to become, does this feel true? Does this feel good? Does this align with my heart, my soul, my compassion? Is this something I will tolerate? Is this something of a need for understanding? And then Venus in Pisces softens what Aquarius clarified and crystallized for us. And this isn't really about bypassing reality. I'm not saying that you go from what was real to what was, like imaginary. It's about letting the heart metabolize what the mind had already seen or intuited or discovered during the previous 3 to 4 weeks that she was transiting through Aquarius. And then with Mercury and Venus both in Pisces, the communication becomes more intuitive, maybe more emotionally responsive, more emotionally intelligent, and maybe more symbolic than literal. And then you may notice fewer words, but more feeling energy, maybe a desire to retreat and rest and just, heighten sensitivity to the energies around you, to the world that is around you, to the events that are out there on the world stage, but also the events that are happening in your personal life. And then this is where the gate 4, as we move into this more Piscean energy, where possibility becomes essential. We don't have to have it the same way every day. We don't have to keep responding or reacting in the same way. And then rather than demanding answers, maybe Pisces energy asks us to stay with the question. Stick with that question of, what is it that is my passion? How do I align more fully with what I love, with what I desire? And rather than emotionally being reactive, it invites you to feel your way forward, like one step at a time, feeling your way forward. I hope this is making sense for everybody, because this is so important. So if something yesterday was disrupted with that Venus squaring Uranus from the sign of Aquarius to Taurus, then a value, a relationship, or an agreement must have been shaken and needs to be replaced or rewritten. You don't need to decide anything yet, though. Right now, let Venus and Pisces sort of help you sense what wants to dissolve and then what wants to be reborn through that space that's opened up. This is emotional intelligence meeting a spiritual intelligence, right? Something we are all capable of, that we all are being asked to evolve more fully into. And it's preparing us for the next very different shift of Saturn later in the week, re-entering Aries to join Neptune in a conjunction that's epic, right? This is an epic conjunction where spirit turns into action. So we're preparing the more spiritual groundwork for who we will become, or who we want to be, who we desire to be, and what we desire to have in our world, what our values and agreements are that support that passion, that support that desire. And then actually having the courage. Courage comes, later, as we know we have to make changes and we step fully into that particular energy. Now, I also wanted to point out that Venus enters into Pisces just as Mercury did in the gate 30, the gate of passion and desire, but then moves quickly into the gate 55. And Mercury has already made that transition. He's now sitting at the gate 55, the gate of abundance through spirit, or the spirit of abundance, or just abundance if you want. In quantum human design, we call this the gate of faith, having the faith that abundance is your birthright, that what you need or want or desire will be made manifest for you. So when Venus enters here, she will be in the gate 30 initially, prompting you to align more fully with those desires. And then next we'll move to 55 that says, okay, now have the faith that what you desire will be yours. So this sequence really matters, right? The sequence, the gate 30 is the passion that lives in the solar plexus, that's related to your emotional intelligence. It's related to your emotional broadcasting, or your taking in of the emotional energy around you. And Venus doesn't ease us into Pisces quietly then. No planet moving into Pisces actually moves in quietly. It moves in through the gate 30 always. And this is entering through desire or longing, and emotional intensity. This is a red flag gate, by the way, in human design, which means it's very important for us, right? It's important to know what you desire and to use the experience of that desire in an appropriate way for you. It wants to feel something fully, and it carries hunger. It carries anticipation energy and the ache of wanting life to be more than what we think it is, right? We want to experience it fully. Now, with Venus here, passion isn't romantic, or it's not just romantic. It's relationship oriented because it is a heart centered energy. It's creative energy. The solar plexus is the seat of our creative energy, but it's also spiritual, as in it is a Piscean connection to spirit. It's the emotional fuel, basically, that draws us toward connection with one another, connection with community or family. It draws us toward meaning and beauty and experiencing our desires made manifest in our worlds, right? But gate 30 also carries a warning. So Venus stepping into Pisces carries a warning. When desire isn't met consciously by us as humans, it can tip us into disappointment and or emotional fixation, where we become fixated on what we want to the point where we actually are constricting our ability to get what we want because we're so tunnel visioned into how it is that we think it will come, or what form that we believe it's going to take. And then we miss the cues that the universe is showing us about how our desire can be made even better, right? Manifested even better. So the gate 55, the next step, is also emotional. The 55 sits on the solar plexus, but it operates at a very different frequency from the gate 30. This isn't about chasing what you want. So the emotional center is not about the energy that's similar to the sacral of going and doing and, keeping that whole chase up. It's about trusting the timing of the fulfillment of your desire, right? In its highest expression, the gate 55 teaches about emotional freedom. It, in fact, in the gift and the siddhi of the gene keys, this gate is freedom. It has the same word, maybe just I would say freedom with a capital F, and then the siddhi is all caps freedom, right? That's how I would look at that. And it's about faith in life itself and abundance that isn't dependent on external circumstances. In other words, you don't have to be a billionaire to get what you want, to get what you desire. You are aligning with it. So this is why in Quantum Human Design, Karen Curry Parker renamed this gate to faith, because gate 55 asks us to trust life even when desire hasn't yet been fulfilled. And I think sometimes the biggest stumbling block to getting our desires fulfilled is that we don't know what it is we want. So this is your opportunity to get some clarity around what it is that you truly desire. Because this week, and these two planets, both Mercury and Venus moving here, is about emotional alchemy. It is about moving from the I want into the releasing of control over how it is it's going to manifest, how it is it's going to show up, and when is the desire going to be met. Here, passion becomes devotion, and longing becomes trust, and emotion becomes faith, the faith that you are truly supported in getting what it is that you desire, in being able to fulfill your highest dreams, your imagination. And this whole Venus, Mercury, both in Pisces now really dovetails perfectly with the gate 49 revolution, which asks us to release the emotional agreements that no longer align with us, right? It may not be a written contract, but we've all made certain agreements that we would be a certain way within our relationships, perhaps, right? I'll always show up as this nurturing, caring, loving person. And then gate 4 in the Ajna says possibility, which asks us to hold ideas lightly and to stay open to what is possible, what more is possible. Sorry. Got to have some water here. So Venus in Pisces really says you don't need certainty. You don't need to have certainty. You just need to trust that what you desire, what you want will happen, and be open-minded to how it is that that will show up for you, right? And then that sets the emotional tone for later in the week when Saturn re-enters Aries. And I'm not going to talk about that today because it happens on Friday. I'll be on air on Friday, so we'll talk about this more fully on Friday. But this is where faith, the faith in Pisces, the faith that is represented by the Piscean spiritual connection, will eventually need to turn into action, right? But not yet, right? Just stay aligned for now. Action will come. For now, the invitation is to feel deeply, to soften the heart and your connection to love and to your relationships, your self-worth, right? And to trust that everything is unfolding just as it is meant to be. And this really isn't what I would call passive energy either. It's faith with emotional intelligence. And that's not necessarily just passive, right? All right. So, questions. Let me take a look at what people are saying here. A dream sign, Terry says. Tamara, good morning. 49.6 is my SQ. I can see where I was tested to make someone comfortable. This is from JLo. I made myself feel uncomfortable. Being a mom is not easy sometimes. Definitely, definitely not. Good morning, Jacqueline Tyler. Good to have you with us this morning. And Colleen McSpirit Brush, good to have you. And Jana Grosskost says, my natal moon and Venus are in gate 55. Woohoo! Abundance. Oh, I love it. I love that. It's an abundance. Got it. Love that. Love that. Love that. I have Mercury at the gate 55, so I feel like it's part of my messaging to always remind people to have faith in a higher power. Indeed, to remind myself about that as well. Okay, let's see. Time-wise, 8:41. I have 20 minutes to talk about something totally different. So I want to talk about Venus before she was nice, right? I feel like sometimes now we have, as astrology, astrologers, astrologists have created a milquetoast kind of version of Venus. And I don't want to say that astrologers created this, because I think all we did was buy into the agreement that Venus would be a certain way. Yet Venus has an absolute different, an older, far more potent archetype associated with her. And this was a different name even, because initially the divine feminine was known as Inanna and Ishtar. So you might be familiar with these characters. They were Babylonian and Assyrian goddesses of fire, right? Goddesses of passion. Then at those times, this particular Venus was not watered down, right? She was raw. She was erotic at times. She was terrifying. She was creative. She was destructive. She was sovereign. Inanna, she was the goddess of love, sex, fertility, and beauty. She was the goddess of war. She was a goddess of conquest and power. And she was the ruler of life and death and rebirth. And she was associated with the planet Venus later in mythology as both morning star and evening star. She was a kind of an embodied paradox, right? She was this feminine creature who was on one hand very creative, birthing, children, birthing the world in a word. And on the other side, also in some ways, a sort of destructress, right? So creatrix and destructress on the other side. And this was something she held without apology, right? She wasn't hiding who she was. There are mythologies that show that describe her as almost this fire coming from the sky and falling to earth to bring this very creative and initiating energy to the planet. And this wasn't love as politeness and quietness. This was love as life force, passion, right? So one of the most important myths that we have here is Inanna's descent into the underworld. And this can be also seen through later myths of Persephone, right? Persephone and Demeter, the mother goddess, and Persephone's descent into Hades, right? She willingly descends, and she's stripped of her garments. She's stripped of all of her symbols of power, and she dies and is reborn. And it should be something that sounds pretty familiar to us, right? We have lots of these reborn sort of mythologies. And this is Venus, Inanna, Ishtar, as the initiatrix, right? Initiating something. The alchemist, making something from something else, turning lead into gold, if you will. The bringer of transformation, but through the energy of desire. And love didn't just feel good here. This is what changed people. This is changing each individual. And of course, here we are with Venus, our watered down version of Inanna and Ishtar, entering into the gate of passion and then moving into the faith energy, the emotional surrender, the energy of rebirth, descending, if you will, into a new energy. Now, Inanna was that sequence, right? She was that sequence that went from passion, desire, longing, and it moved into faith and moved into what it took to transform. Almost like the caterpillar turning into the chrysalis to then be rebirthed as the butterfly. So when did Venus get softened? When did that energy of love and passion, the divine feminine, when did she get watered down? And maybe even why? Because the watering down happened gradually, but we can kind of point to three key phases of the watering down of Inanna and Ishtar into what is now the current Venus. And the first is about patriarchal reframing, right? As societies shifted over the course of time to more patriarchal power structures, female deities ended up being split up, right? They shifted the split to a nurturing aspect that was preserved. So the caring, the creative aspects were preserved, but the threatening aspects, the war goddess, right? The passionate woman, those were, or the passion, were suppressed. And a goddess who ruled sex and war was dangerous to a centralized male authority, right? So Venus was softened into beauty without sovereignty, love but without rage, desire without consequence. And then come the Greek philosophers and the Greek mythologies. When Inanna became Aphrodite, she was still sensual, but increasingly she was framed through the male gaze, how the male looked at beauty and form, and through mythic drama rather than sovereignty. So there was an imprint being placed upon the feminine. Her power became reactive versus initiating. Her power became relational rather than autonomous, right? She was this peacemaker now, bringing together people rather than standing in her own power. She was desired, but she was no longer in charge. So this is part of the watering down. The third step was Roman and Christian sanitizing of Venus. By the time we reach Venus, the current Venus, the Christian overlays became more romantic. Love became more romantic. It became more aesthetic. Venus representing the aesthetic of beauty, right? And the romance of beauty, the romance of relationships. And she became morally constrained, right? Moral constraint. She was divorced from spirituality, and desire became something to manage, not to express. Desire became something to repent for, not live out loud with. Interesting. And Venus lost her teeth, right? She lost that passion. And why this really matters now is because we see that split Venus, right? We have Venus in her, she's allowed to be a mother and to be nurturing the young and to, be someone that is creating the values and the relationship. And she's also seen as beauty. We prefer beauty and harmony and peace, right? Through the aesthetics. And as Venus enters Pisces right now, I wanted us to think about the sign itself, which is a sign of myth. It's a sign of memory and collective unconscious. It's the fishes that are swimming in the deep waters of the unconscious as well as through the conscious. And the older archetype wakes up here, potentially wakes up here. And this isn't about reclaiming anything, because Pisces really just remembers what's been erased. We can reawaken certain parts here. We can reclaim certain parts of the Inanna Ishtar Venus story that were her being in her emotional sovereignty, her erotic aliveness, her spiritual powerfulness. And that's exactly why this seems so interesting to me today, because as we're moving into this 49 energy of revolution, would be about ending outdated agreements about how it is we're going to deal with our Venus. Right now she's split into Venus and Lilith, right? Venus and the black moon Lilith. That is where we see the split, right? Venus is the okay, I can be this, the face. This is the okayed archetype in a patriarchal society for women to be in. And then there's this black moon Lilith, which is all the other pieces over here that got squelched, right? And this is why Lilith holds such rage, because the astrological Venus has been so watered down that those desires went underground, and they went underground into the body of the black moon Lilith. And, Venus didn't start out as this goddess of romance. She started out as the goddess of life force. And maybe that's what we're remembering now. Maybe that's what we need to remember now. That, Venus isn't necessarily about how to love nicely, even though that is a part of it, but how is it to love truthfully, to love fully, to be fully engaged in the divine feminine energy. So when we entered into this split, this part of Venus, her power was exiled. And exiles create shadows, right? So, and I'm not just talking for women, but even for the masculine, the men out here, right? This is an energetic shift that exiled your passions, your creativity. The fierce, sovereign, erotic, and uncompromising aspects of Venus, those that were once embodied by Inanna and Ishtar, had to go somewhere, right? When the patriarchal system wouldn't accept it or could no longer tolerate them, they went underground. They became mythologized as dangerous, as wild, as unacceptable. And they reemerged because they don't just go away. Energy cannot be created. Energy cannot be destroyed, right? It can't be destroyed. It just went somewhere. And it went underground and emerged as Lilith, black moon Lilith. And Lilith isn't a separate archetype from Venus, or she should not be treated as such. She is Venus without permission. So we have to restore permission to Venus. Now, how did this happen? How was Venus sanitized? Because she was, right? In order to build a hierarchical, control-based system, the feminine had to be divided. And she was divided into Venus, love, beauty, harmony, acceptability. And in some respects, she was also divided. The divine feminine was divided into the moon as well. The moon is the only other acceptable archetype for the divine feminine, which is the mother, right? Mother, nurturer, caretaker, teacher, energy. And then there was Lilith, who now embodies the rage, the sexuality, the refusal, the exile, the permission to be living fully. And the split allowed the patriarchy to say, we'll keep the parts of the feminine that soothe and inspire, but we'll demonize the parts that won't submit, the wild parts that won't submit. So Venus became palatable. Lilith carried the rage of suppression. She carries the rage of suppression. But here's the truth. Lilith's rage is not destructive so much as it's diagnostic. It's telling us something. It tells us that, life force has been constrained too much, right? Life force has been brought in. And we see it bust out in all kinds of ways through murder, mayhem, domestic violence, assaults, right? Not just talking about, men who perpetrate crimes, but in society in general, right? Those energies in part come from this suppressed energy. And we're in a moment right now where centralized authority is cracking and where consent-based structures are kind of replacing the obedience-based ones. And this has been happening over time. This isn't just like this week or, this month, but certainly bringing right into our faces today. And where relational truth matters more than the appearance of truth, right? We're looking for the deeper truth, and where embodiment is about claiming and reclaiming spirituality. And this is not accidental, by the way. This is the return of the unified feminine archetype, where we're busting out of being either Venus or Lilith, but Venus with Lilith, right? The embodiment of both, where we have love without boundaries, desire without sovereignty, where beauty has teeth, and where compassion that doesn't self-abandon, doesn't just give up on itself or give up on others. And this mirrors exactly what it is that we've been talking about this morning with the sun in the gate 49 revolution and the movement of Venus herself into the gate of emotional freedom beyond the external control through the gate 55, the bigger energies of freedom. And then faith doesn't come from compliance to old archetypes. Really think about the roles that you're playing. And are you playing them because you want to play them, or because you have to play them in order to be fitting in with society, right? In history, there are, the women who broke the mold, and some of them were vilified, right? Some of them were they were exiled, right? Yet when you think about the acceptable role for women, it's an interesting story, right? Just totally interesting. So now if we look at Lilith as the keeper of what was lost, right? This repository of the feminine energies that the patriarchy didn't accept, then she is the energy that brings back our autonomy. Where our autonomy was denied, the Black Moon Lilith brings it back. Where desire was shamed, the Black Moon Lilith, she brings it back. And where our voices, the divine feminine voice, was squelched or silenced, the Black Moon Lilith brings it back, right? We're bringing it back into Venus. She carries the memory of the original feminine authority. She says the rage, the creative energy, the erotic energy, the fully lived energy is acceptable, right? She safeguards basically right now what Venus can't openly express yet. But it's only because we've accepted and agreed that this is how things would be. So now as Venus is moving through Pisces, right, as she begins that journey moving through Pisces, memory, myth, and the collective consciousness or unconsciousness, as it were, that has hidden that lineage, resurfaces. Why else would I bring it up today of all days, right? Now, what I portrayed this earlier as a downsizing of the divine feminine. But what would it look like to downsize the patriarchy, right? What does that really mean? And this, I'm not talking about overthrowing the patriarchy through force, right? I'm not saying we have to force, like, women rise up, go to war against the patriarchy. That's not what I'm really thinking about here. What I'm thinking about is the way that we could make patriarchy irrelevant. Because patriarchy weakens when people no longer abandon themselves for the approval of society, or to be accepted in society, or to be acceptable. Patriarchy weakens when relationships are built on resonance, not roles. I'll love you if you behave this way, right? And the patriarchy weakens when authority is earned through integrity, not through position, right? So that would restore Venus. That would redeem the Black Moon Lilith. And that's when love is no longer separated from power, right? When the divine feminine no longer has to separate acceptability from her power, right? They come back, they rejoin. And maybe what we're witnessing isn't the rise of a rage so much as it's the return of feminine power that was never meant to be tamed, right? So now what we see, as I finish this up, is a refusal of the unworthy agreements that we've entered into, right? Not necessarily impulsively, not necessarily dramatically, but in a principled way, by no longer living the old principles, the old agreements. The gate 49 enters into this picture for us because this gate knows at a cellular level when an agreement or a relationship or a value system can no longer sustain life, can no longer sustain intimacy or even peace. And when we bring Venus and Lilith back together, and when we bring them into this conversation in the world, those traits even into the world, the gate 49 of revolution becomes this bridge where love and refusal reunite, right? Where we bring these pieces together. And that's because here's the truth. Venus alone was trained to endure, just to endure the roles that they were doled out. Lilith alone was trained to reject, right? To fight against what is happening. But now, love, Venus in Pisces, Venus in the gate 30 of passion and moving into the gate 55 of faith says that we are allowed to love and say no, right? Say no. So we're not revolting against people so much as we're revolting against the misaligned contracts that have been created through history, not just today and yesterday, but through history. And contracts like that, love requires self-abandonment. To love another, you have to give up yourself. Or loyalty that demands silence. Take a look at that in the government right now, right? Who's requiring you to blindly follow them? Harmony that comes at the cost of truth, but also security that's built on emotional suppression. These are all these things that are contracts that we've lived out that are no longer sustainable. And these agreements are how the patriarchy thrived, right? So gate 49 comes in, says enough is enough. And this is where Lilith enters, not as rage, just for rage's sake, but as a boundary intelligence, right? Something that says, wait, we need to bring something back together. So we have this need for the return of the original Venus, the original Inanna, the original Ishtar, where Venus becomes more than just acceptable as a beauty or as a relationship, and where the Venus that we know in astrology at this moment is elevated back to her fully engaged self, not just a partial vision of who she was. And Lilith being part of this conversation that says, I refuse what dishonors me, right? If this dishonors me, It's not who I'm going to be. It's not what I'm going to do. It's not who I'm going to hang out with. It's not what I'm going to agree to. And together, we rise then into a revolution without destruction. We don't have to go out and make war on the world in order to raise up ourselves and empower ourselves to live the full Venus. All right. Well, that took a little longer than I expected today, but I would love to hear your thoughts on all of this and what it is that, that we can do within our own lives. Where have you personally bought into that watered down Venus? And then I think what would be fun for us to do after this, not necessarily today, but is to take a look at Venus in our charts through the different signs and see what the watered down Venus has brought us to. That would be maybe a webinar in and of itself. All right, everybody, thank you so much for joining me today. I've loved having this conversation. Have a great week. I will see you on Friday. Bye for now.